Good day, everyone. Welcome to the part of the series where we are discussing about the success of engineering and design industry. For this, I would like to welcome Krishna Bandaru, Executive Leadership Team at SkillLink. Just a quick introduction of Krishna. Krishna is responsible for scaling up the capability to deliver industry-relevant curriculum and content in partnership with industry and academia. Krishna is also focusing on transforming the customer experience capability across the online and offline skills centers. Welcome, Krishna, to this meeting.
Thank you, Pramod.
So let me start, Krishna, with the linkage along with business, along with cutting edge technology and partners. Today, as you all know, we are in the phase of innovation, and business must innovate themselves and work on cutting edge disruptive technologies to meet the industry expectations. But mostly these innovations become difficult when there are no partners involved. There is a complete ecosystem that needs to be there to ensure that innovation survives. So can you talk a bit about the kind of strategic partnership enterprise need to focus on for being innovative as well as competitive in the market?
An excellent question, Pramod. I think given the focus of engineering and R&D services in this space, and given that our discussion is focused on engineering and design, the ER&D sector, I think 2020, 2030 is going to be a breakthrough decade for ER&D sector for many reasons. Number one, I think major technology trends, whether it is electrification, whether it is sensorization, automation, right, and cybersecurity, all of these things, while at an application level or at an enterprise level, are served by the regular IT services companies. But when all of these are combined and getting into a product, right, that's where engineering and design services gets impacted, right? Given that these trends have accelerated significantly in the last 2 years, I think the ER&D services sector is set for a boom in terms of the kind of services that are going to be expected from offshore locations like India and other countries. It's going to be even higher end services like embedded and VLSI services, and security maybe not at a application layer level, but even at a product level, at chip level, right? So in order to provide such innovative services, what are the typical stumbling blocks? I think one of the biggest stumbling block is talent. I think organizations like NASSCOM have already done extensive studies with the likes of McKinsey and have highlighted that there's going to be 30 to 40% gap between the supply of talent and what the demand is going to be there for ER&D services. When I say ER&D services, I'm including the services players and even the captives of various companies that are doing the engineering captives of various companies across sectors.
Okay.
Now, if talent is going to be a stumbling block, how do we solve for it? And we all know, I think from the outset, we think that India produces a number of engineering graduates, lakhs of engineering graduates every year, almost 1.5 million entering this employment sector. But I think we hear the industry complaining that a large percentage of them are unemployable. And hence, industry takes up the burden of training them and getting them ready for the job. Now, thereby hitting the competitiveness of these companies, whether it is time to market that is hindered because of this training, or whether it is the costs that are incurred, right? And we don't want to see this IT cycle repeating here, where we go after talent and the talent does job hopping, right? Thereby increasing the costs for every company. In order to solve this talent crisis, I think there needs to be a talent ecosystem partnership between industry, academia, and private finishing schools. What can be the contours of that industry, academia, and private finishing schools partnerships? I think all of us have been hearing this for the last 15 years that industry academia partnership needs to be strengthened. But why is it not happening? And how can a formal partnership take place? I think is the crux of the problem. Number one, I think the emergence of technology has enabled online education at a unprecedented pace in the last 2 years, right? And hence the industry needs to ride this trend on how technology can be enabled to prepare students with the latest skills that are required, right? So for that, there's a huge private sector we've seen in India, which is revolutionizing the education technology or the edtech space. So there are many companies emerging even for higher education who can do this for the industry. That is, how can they prepare engineering graduates in the skills that are required by the industry? So a partnership between finishing schools, which are primarily edtech players, between academia, which produces the engineering graduates, and the industry, which requires these people. I think partnership needs to be formalized and scaled up. And technology enables the scaling up of these partnerships in a big way.
Great, Krishna. I think that's a very good point that you have said. And with the last 2 years being hit by pandemic and technology forming a very key aspect, a lot of virtual training is also right now being given. So just taking that question forward, if I look at the IT sector today, there are IT services is different, ER&DC services is different. The reason why I'm saying that is today you have guarantee services, which electronic research and design services, which is completely dependent on virtual labs and physical labs. So how does learning happens in such a virtual scenario where you have a physical lab involvement that is required, an interface with the physical lab that is required to ensure that the students coming out of the academia are industry ready to move into this sector?
I think once again, excellent question, Pramod. I think given you are also from the industry, the nuances are coming through. And let me try to say how this is being solved right now and how the industry needs to partner even more for scaling this up, right? So let's take certain examples. The ER&D sector requires skills largely in simulation and analysis, let's say, whether it is a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, or an electronics engineer. They require both skills on both sides of the V, so to say, right? On both sides of the V in the product development cycle. Now, any model, any digital model has got to be a hybrid learning model. What do I mean by the hybrid learning model? That is, even before they get to the hardware labs, I think our engineers need to get the engineering basics right. Engineering basics, simulation and analysis using real industry grade software. These are not student versions, real industry grade software, and create a project portfolio that actually reflects their knowledge. That is number one, reflects their theoretical knowledge and how they apply it using software. The reason I say hybrid is, while simulation and analysis can work even remotely, I think whether it is embedded or VLSI, sometimes it requires actually physical lab environments. I think that is where the private sector comes into play, the finishing schools. These finishing schools actually can set up this lab infrastructure in not only in the 4 or 5 metro locations, but in the next 10 tier 2 locations. Because I think for ER&D to secure the talent, they need to move beyond tier 1 location. They need to go to tier 2 locations where great talent is there. So the finishing school can set up infrastructure which need not be used by only one engineering college or 2 engineering colleges, which can be used by multiple people graduating from multiple engineering colleges, as well as people who are actually working. Now, what the pandemic has taught, in fact, even in our enrollment, 30% of the students are people who are working in the industry. So people working in the industry also want to upskill themselves, right? And hence, this physical lab environment combined with online education, industry participation through webinars and giving projects, which these people can do, can really set the flywheel running.
That's great. So if you look at when you started off, you have mentioned that this industry is going to have a huge transformation with respect to various technology, with electric cars coming in and various technology. So there are 3 phases that I really look at if you want talent to be. One, like you rightly said, from the academia, how do I make it industry ready talent? Second, there's a set of people who are there in this industry, primarily working on old technologies, which need to be reskilled. And there are some talent that need to be brought in, which need to be upskilled to the technology. So do you see a different scenario panning out for each of this targeted market, how the skilling would happen?
Once again, excellent question, Pramod. So let me walk you through the life cycle, and I think the interventions that the industry needs to plan for each one of them. I think a student typically joins any of these ER&D companies when he's in his sixth semester or seventh semester, when he's given an offer, let's say in campus recruitment. And then he spends the next 12 to 15 months in college or in a break before he joins the company, right? And then the training starts for that person. He gets trained for 6 months and then he starts becoming productive. So, in my view, this is 21 months of lost time, right? What can be done here, right? I think these are models that are uh, already being taken up by very progressive thinking companies. We have some of our clients telling us we have given offers to 150 GETs who are yet to leave college. We want them to use your EdTech platform for getting trained over the next 12 months so that they're ready from day one. That is model number one. Model number two, once they join your company, GETs, right? And for ER&D companies, training is not their main business. Serving clients is their main business, right? But for EdTech companies or for other finishing schools, training is their main business. So they continuously invest in content, faculty in order to train people, right? And hence, getting customized training, very intensive training for the first 2 months delivered by an external partner is equivalent to a 6-month kind of training delivered internally, right?
Okay.
That is number two. The biggest thing is that you mentioned is for the experienced people. They are 3 years into your system or 5 years into your system. They've done the projects that were there in the market at that point of time, but the market has changed. Now, how do they upskill
Correct.
themselves, right? I think it's a huge logistics hassle for any organization to figure out where are the competency gaps and figure out the content and choose the right platform. I think one of the mistakes that is being done today is there are two kinds of finishing schools or edtech platforms. There are ones which are great in breadth, right? Which offer a wide variety of courses, which predominantly are suitable for IT services kind of companies. Whereas ER&D companies require a lot of depth in certain areas. Just to give you an example, you could pick up any course of data analytics or data science in the market, and most of the data sets that students will be working with or experienced people will be working with are sales data, marketing data, insurance data. But as an ER&D player, you want your employees to work on engineering data, manufacturing data, in order to learn data analytics and data science. And hence, very targeted online programs. I think for experienced people, online learning is the mantra because they have access to the lab environment within their own companies. They can actually access this at their own pace. The only thing, one of the great models that is being followed by some of the companies is they are identifying new technologies such as battery management systems, autonomous vehicles, or specific to ADAS or AUTOSAR, and they're designing programs and they're putting 200 and 300 people through the funnel for 2-3 months to get reskilled on that. I think that is key. Obviously, for the senior levels, it's more about managing digital transformation, etc., for which the horizontal kind of edtechs would suffice.
Sure. I think, like you rightly said, ER&D has a unique character. So if I look at an IT services, I can be a Python, Java, and I can do programming. Whereas if I look at ER&D, there's a combination of various factors. You have a core engineering, which is there, which is either mechanical or any of those core engineering. Then you have an electronic side to that mechanical. Then you have a software side. So how do you determine the talent that has to work on each of this area? How does organization in the ER&D space work with partners to determine which is the right pool of talent that need to come into each of these specific areas?
That's an excellent question again. I think both at the entry level as well as at the upskilling level, this question arises. One thing that companies need to do is to define the competencies that are required for the new age work that they're trying to deliver from India. Let's take the example of mechanical engineering design, right? I think earlier it was fine for people to do design services using regular CAD tools. But now there's design automation that is happening. That means a mechanical engineer not only needs to know what the design package is, but he also needs to understand Python in order to automate design, right? So
Correct.
those skills need to be taught to a mechanical engineer, and there are finishing schools. I mean, Skilling does this very well, and I'm sure there are other platforms as well which can do this, of teaching computational methods for every discipline. Similarly, for let's say computational fluid dynamics, I think CFD is a high-end service job that can be delivered from India. Currently, we don't deliver too much of high-end CFD work for mechanical engineers because we've not taught mechanical engineers a lot of computer science.
Okay.
Right? That can be delivered. Similarly, for electrical engineers, I think electrification is the trend, we should not miss this wave of electrification. So for electrification, modeling, right? Model-based design is extremely important. So for electrical people, teaching them MATLAB and Simulink-based models, the fundamentals of automotive or aviation or medical equipment, and then on top of that, teaching them MATLAB and Simulink is very critical. Similarly, electronics, as you said, the chip design services. I mean, the earlier chip design only used to be done by the captives and slightly lower end used to work. Now we are doing a lot more higher end work in chip design and chip design services by ER&D companies, right? And hence, the electronics graduates actually can be taught the basics both on analog and digital side, and be taught to use tools like Cadence, etc., to be prepared for these jobs. I think a segmented strategy for each discipline, combining software tools and a lot of computational tools, is the key.
Oh, great. So the other thing which I clearly see happening across industry are two or three things, and which is also similar to this industry, R&D industry, is you have a lot of automation that is coming in. You have a skill gap that is there. You have a huge technology transition that's happening. So from your perspective, and innovation is the mantra. So if I take these four areas, how do you think all these four work together, and keeping talent transformation as a key initiative? How does all these four come into one umbrella so that the organization can take value out of it?
Sorry, Pramod, could you just repeat the four areas once again?
So the four areas are automation.
Yeah.
That is one area. Second is innovation. Third is that a technology gap that is right now there. So that's the third area that is there across, if you look at all the three domains right now. And then how do organizations innovate in this scenario? When you have all this going on, how do we innovate? And so that each organization can bring in a unique value to the industry as well as to themselves.
Once again, I think the whole point about talent transformation to enable this, right? When you talk about automation, the technology gaps, what it boils down to is the rapid change in the requirements of even ER&D clients, the pace at which they want talent to upskill themselves, right? Now, I think we need to take a serious relook at the way we look at recruiting our talent, the way the learning and development roadmaps are created within each organization, right? I think we already apply agile methodology to the way we deliver projects. I think it's high time we apply agile methodology to the way to our own HR practices, right? To the way we recruit talent, to the way we develop them in the early times, and the way we retain them, right? I think when we're not the reason why people are shifting companies most of the time, and I think the best way to retain people is to reskill them, right? I think if you can enable a reskilling of talent, it actually helps you in multiple ways. It helps you innovate, it helps you serve clients better, it helps you to get more work to India for higher value services, right? And it also helps you retain these people, because retention is a huge expense for the organizations, right? So I think the talent transformation overall, if you look at it, right from hire to the time they leave the organization, right, it needs a serious relook and usage of technology, whether it is for recruitment, assessment, L&D. And I think we need to get rid of our old models, right? We will only go to colleges. We will only look at these percentages. The way we'll recruit talent needs to change, and the way we need to train talent needs to change.
Awesome. That leads to me another question. Today, if you look at, we talked about three sessions of people. One is academia, one is people who need reskill in that industry, one set of people who need upskill. But with the pandemic and the new working model, which is going to be hybrid model, there is a new set of workforce that's coming out, which I call the gig workforce, which is work anywhere, anytime, or doing part-time work, and which are very talented, skilled work. So there are a lot of women who have went back from the corporates once they become a mothers and others. A lot of women have gone back, but they all want to come back into the industry. And here's a big opportunity that the industry see as well as the working population see to be a gig worker where I can do anytime, anywhere working. How does partnership like yours and the academia and the skilling enable such gig folks to come back into the mainstream working?
In fact, a personal anecdote from my end is my family has been the beneficiary of return to work policies. My wife, after a long break, because of this return to work program of one of the MNCs, right, has reskilled herself in analytics and joined the analytics workforce, right? That's a
Wow.
that's a big revelation for me, right? After 10-year break, she said, I'll get skilled in analytics, and then she's joined and now she's delivering. I think there are 2 points to this. I think a return to workforce is an unused lever, I would say, right? I think it's a significant lever for arresting this talent shortage. I think every R&D company wants talent yesterday, right? So if we can break the shackles in our mind that a break of 5 years or 6 years, they won't be able to get back to work, that's not true any longer, right? And the larger IT industry has demonstrated that people are getting back to work after a 5 to 10-year break and still being productive. I think the way to do it is to specify areas in which they need to get reskilled before they join the workforce. That is number one. Partner with companies like ours to drive such a program. That is, we want to attract 500 women back to work, but they should be skilled in embedded C. I'm just giving an example. And run a program where a finishing school trains them and gets them back to work. That's a wonderful model. And some companies have already started doing. That is number one. Coming to the gig workforce, I personally worked with one of the largest staffing providers, more in the gray collar business, some time ago in my consulting life. And it's huge potential even for white collar workforce in India. What has happened? I mean, COVID was unfortunate, but what it has revealed is people can work from anywhere and be productive, right? And hence, and hence, there are specific skill set that you need for certain projects, right? If you put them out and run a structured program, that is, when people like us who are skilling platforms, when we say, taking an example again of design automation or embedded or VLSI, typically, which is seeing a lot of talent shortage, right? There are people out there who want to work again from anywhere, but who want to work on these projects. But we need to restructure our HR policies and partner with these private finishing schools, private academies, learning academies to scale it up. I think ER&D's HR organization is very valuable. It can do X. It has to be there. It has to do X. But how can you make it 5X by partnering with all such ecosystem players is the key.
Oh, great. I think we are coming close to our discussion, but one last question leading from here is diversity and inclusion is a big part of any organization today. So from your perspective, is it good to run programs to ensure that we have gig workforce and also include the diversity and inclusion part to ensure that there is a upscale in number of people coming into the corporate based on the skilling that they have done?
Absolutely. I think diversity and inclusion, while it's a very broad topic, but maybe if we just focus on gender parity as one component of diversity, Pramod, as I told you, I've come from Accenture where 50% diversity is our goal by 2023, I guess. And I've been part of an organization which has run this religiously and has delivered stellar stockholder returns. Right? I think today the market wants DEI to be a key organizational initiative. There's no doubt about it. Right? Not all organizations are there in that ratios. I think one needs to set up these goals. If you are at 10%, how do you move to 25%?
20%.
Right? If you are at 20%, how do you move to 30%? That needs to be run as a program. Now, what that reveals is, if you even go by the Economist research, I think India can up its GDP by a couple of percentage points by just leveraging its women workforce. Right? I think ER&D sector is no exception, right? A lot of people who've left their embedded careers, who got trained in CDAC in the erstwhile 2000s, who've left their careers and who are now eager to come back, right? But there's no defined path for them. I think we need to establish these programs, publicize them. I think an organization has only limited bandwidth to market these programs, but these edtech platforms, that's their main business. They can actually market it, get them on board, train them, and deploy them to the organizations. That is one. I think another aspect of diversity and inclusion is, I remember in late 90s when only BTechs were allowed in IT services, right? And then slowly and gradually, when the scale began, you opened up various other
Correct.
arenas, degrees, etc. I think ER&D might go through the same pace. While yes, it is engineering R&D, but there are pockets of work which might not necessarily require all the barriers that we put for qualifying, right? That is inclusion in a different way, as long as they're technically skilled.
Great. I think that's great. Nice, Krishna. Nice chatting up with you. I think it was a very informative session for all of us, and I'm sure the industry would be able to take substantial value from the discussion with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Pramod, for giving me this opportunity. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.